Tonight's a very special night. We're here to celebrate Mimi Khúc incredible new book, Dear Elia, Letters to American Biz. It's a series of letters tracing and bearing witness to the feeling, meanings, and textures of Asian American unwellness. At the intersections of ableism, model minoritization, and the university, the book beautifully explores new approaches to building collective care, which Mimi does so beautifully every day of her life. So I feel very grateful to be in this space celebrating you. And we're also graced by Elia tonight. So say hi. I don't mean to put you on the spot. It's so awesome to have you here. Mimi Khúc is a writer, scholar, and teacher of all things unwell. She is an adjunct lecturer in disability studies at Georgetown University and co-editor of the Asian American Literary Review. She is the creator of the acclaimed mental health projects, Open in Emergency, and the Asian American Tarot, which you can see back there if you want little activities just for you. And of course, the author of Dear Elia, Letters from the Asian American Abyss. Mimi will be joined by the illustrious Jess X, a non-binary filmmaker, multidisciplinary artist, and poet. They're a recent graduate of the directing MFA program at NYU, recently named one of Filmmaker Magazine's 25 New Faces of Independent Film. Their body of work reimagines queer Asian diaspora, kinship across cultures and species, mental health, and abolitionist movements. Also joining us is the amazing Pyaari Azaadi, formerly known as J. Abhichandani, immigrated to the US in 1984. She received her MFA from Goldsmiths College, University of London. She has intertwined studio and social practice, art and activism, creating transformative work with queer BIPOC communities in New York for 3 decades. She founded the South Asian Women's Creative Collective, SASI, who we share an office with. They're actually right back there in New York in 1997 and London 2004. She was awarded grants by the FST Studio Projects Fund and the Foundation for Contemporary Art in 2001 and NIFA Fellowship in Sculpture in 2023. Okay, let's get started, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, I am an Asian American woman with short black hair, wearing a pink shirt and white and cherry blossom pants with black boots. And today I'm here to talk about that book. Thank you so much. I invited these 3 illustrious people to come help me have a discussion tonight. And I actually asked Jess and Pyaari to pick out the passages for me to read, which I enjoy that as a process a lot. One, because it lets me off the hook, having to decide what to read, but also it allows me to engage what is most meaningful and resonant for the people who I'm in conversation with. And so I'm going to read a few different selections. They pick stuff all over the book, which is kind of amazing. I'll give a little context to each of the things that I read. But I also asked for, I volunteered Elia to do the first read. And so this is something that Jess picked for me to read. It is the student tarot card that I curated. So if you don't know, I curated a deck of tarot cards called the Asian American Tarot as a mental health project with a bazillion collaborators. And the student card in particular is a collectively written card because I didn't want to write it. I'm not a student. I didn't want to make one student write it. So I actually asked students to submit fragments, ideas, thoughts on while I was touring the US, visiting colleges and talking about mental health. And so we took that kind of raw material and then crafted a tarot card out of it that's hopefully reflects student experience. So Elia is going to read the text that's on the back of the card.
The student is the 29th card in the major arcana, sometimes known as the lost card. The student cried the day of graduation. They played one role for the mother, another for schools, another as the daughter, another for workforces, another as the model minority, another for the states, always in the pole of the annihilating one. The student is, at essence, a note taker. Be grateful, always be okay. Chase the promise of this for hours. Never complain. Never be sick. Keep going. Nothing is ever enough. The work goes on, impossibly on. Is college life normal stress? What would it mean to leave? Strike that. We are finishing our parents' immigration stories, leaving behind the fact of living. We are not grades, a condition of what can't. Don't feel guilty. Strike that. Drawing the student card in a reading reminds you that student debt extends forward and backwards across our collective lifetimes. But ask yourself, what is it you actually owe? Your entire personhood, and then more. We gave you your past, now give us your future. The student urges us to refuse. If schools are a feeder system for churning out good citizens, embrace being a bad citizen. Embrace being a bad subject, a bad student, a bad child, a bad person, a revolutionary. Remember that the Asian American movement was birthed in the fires of student protest. Written by students everywhere.
Thank you so much. Okay. So Jess asked to share the student card, and I'm really excited to talk to Jess more about that card. And then Pyaari actually asked me to share something from the book that I thought would go well right after that card. Because the end of that card suggests that we might think about what it means to be bad at things and embrace badness. And so I'm reading a list in the book that here are all the ways that I'm a bad professor and scholar and academic for your reading pleasure. I don't read much. I write sporadically, sometimes go full years without writing. I always turn in essays, articles, chapters late. I don't apply for grants or fellowships. I don't answer emails quickly or sometimes at all. I lose track of emails, forgetting which ones I did respond to or didn't respond to. I don't prep for teaching. I don't do my own readings. I miss deadlines, forget to register for things, forget to renew memberships, forget to apply to things. I don't publish regularly. I've published one peer-reviewed journal article ever. I don't cite well or enough. I also never remember or follow citation style guides. Typical nodding. Yeah. I don't attend department or university events. I rarely go to colleagues' talks. I register for things and then don't show up. I forget to respond to my students' emails, sometimes timely ones related to class assignments, cancel class several times a semester. I turn grades in late. I let my students call me by my first name, let them turn things in late, sometimes not at all. I don't read my colleagues' books. I don't keep up with the latest books in my fields. I write my conference papers the week of, sometimes the day of, and lately I just recycle something I wrote before. Actually, I don't even really present research at conferences anymore. I barely even attend any conferences. When I do, I don't go to any panels. During the pandemic, I have been worse about all of these things. I didn't do any reading, writing, speaking, or administrative emailing for most of 2020. In the summer of 2020, I didn't work academically at all. Consider this your academic Rorschach test. Which of the above made you squirm most? But I don't usually feel like a failure, or a bad scholar, or a bad teacher, or a bad person. In fact, I often feel like a success, a good teacher, a good scholar, an amazing teacher, a pretty darn good human. I'm thoughtful and caring, ethical and discerning. I take care of myself, my colleagues, my friends, my students, my children, as much as I can. I'm generous and feelingful and expressively joyful and fucking hilarious. I think hard and feel hard. I create when I can and when I want. How I can, how I want. I cultivate joy with great intention for myself and others. I rest a lot. I laze about as much as possible, and that perhaps is one of my greatest successes. I am lazy as fuck, and I luxuriate in it. I call this sloth professoring. Next thing I'm reading, so I have a chapter in this book called How to Save Your Asian American Life in an Hour. And the topic of that chapter is about what it feels like to be the child of immigrants and the sense of debt that we have to our parents for their sacrifices. And both Jess and Pyaari picked a ton of passages from this section, so I'm really excited to share this with you. So I'm starting out with actually a quote that I include in the book by Eliza No, that's N-O-H. But she actually wrote this essay called A Letter to My Sister under a pen name, Lisa Park, P-A-R-K. And she wrote this as actually her undergraduate thesis. She's a scholar now in Asian American mental health. The Asian model minority is not doing well. Do you see what a lie it is and how it is used to reinforce the American dream and punish those of us who don't succeed, who succeed too much? It is making me mad knowing the truth of this culture, which is so obvious and yet so strategically dissimulated in the everyday that it becomes invisible. Nothing is left but the violence that results from its disappearance. How do you point out the horror of something that is so fundamentally banal and routine that it ceases to appear dramatic? Our inclusion into the American process turned out to be our worst form of oppression. Isn't our madness often the only evidence we have at all to show for this civilizing terror? Eliza's work has been was a big inspiration. Okay, and we're going to get to the meat of intergenerational conflict. I am sorry, not sorry to say that intergenerational conflict in Asian immigrant families does not come simply out of a cultural clash between traditional or Confucian or collectivist parents, those are the words people often use, and their Americanized or individualistic children, no matter how seductive this narrative may be. And it is seductive to our community for many reasons. It allows parents to frame themselves as bastions of authenticity and tradition and as absolute cultural authorities, while their children are shameful assimilationists giving into the depravity of their American environment. This allows parents to be critical of parts of American life, an outlet for frustration and grief and anger at the broken promise of the American dream. The children of immigrant parents, this narrative allows them to dismiss their parents as backward, old school, and see themselves as progressive, modern, democratic, and thus more American, in an America that does not ever truly allow them to be fully American, but more American than their parents. Look closely and you'll find that immigrants invoke their cultures of origin much more discursively than in actual practice, meaning we say we're maintaining traditions much more than we're actually able to exactly replicate them. Because that positions us as cultural and moral authorities, as representatives of our immigrant communities, as good community members, and as parents to unruly children. But parenting is not a tradition handed down and brought over unadulterated and outside of history. For immigrants to the US, it is shaped and driven by the demands of surviving in capitalist America. And the environment in which Asian immigrants have found themselves has been historically harsh. This context is crucially important. Struggling families see themselves and reorganize themselves as economic units. This means that everybody in the family has to contribute for the family's survival. Precarity defines family relations, so that the child becomes the debtor and the parent the creditor. And I'm getting this concept out of Erin Ning's work, it's N-I-N-H. from her book Ingratitude. So I call it preaching the gospel of error. Preach the gospel of error in this book. So this means that parental care transmutes to sacrifice, and children's survival becomes the debt. Hence, for Aaron and for me, debt is less a cultural value brought over from Asian countries of origin, and more a product, a constituent element of immigrant struggle in capitalist America. So children accrue debt for their very lives. They owe their continued existence to their parents' labors. Parental sacrifice takes on new meaning in a new land. The stakes unbearably high, the sense of economic danger, and imminent class failure unbearably urgent. Of course, parents must sacrifice in this context. And of course, their children's survival is not a given. If your survival, your entire existence, is something directly owed to your parents' work and sacrifice, then of course your existence, your selfhood, is how the debt must be paid. Because you would literally be nothing without your parents, or so they say. One pays this debt of selfhood by being a good child, the right kind of person at all times. If one fails, then you will fail at some point, perhaps often, because you are set up to fail. Because perfection is a horizon meant to keep you obedient, not to actually be reached. Then you're the bad child, the ungrateful child, a waste of all the sacrifices that have been made on your behalf, an investment with negative returns, a failure of the worst kind, failure of personhood that reverberates outward to hurt everyone who loves you. Children of immigrants and refugees, this is why being ungrateful is one of our greatest fears. What non-Asian Americans often don't understand about second generation Asian American mental health is how high the stakes of failure are. What it feels like to live in perpetual near failure. I've called this the slow death of not being enough. Because in this system, you're always not enough. This continues from that same chapter. This is actually the end of the chapter. So spoiler, getting to the end of the chapter. Dear reader, indulge me in a closing reflection on the why of this book. In this chapter, I've walked through what I've done to save Asian American lives in my classrooms and workshops. And I write it all down here in the hopes it will save your life. Because I don't know where else Asian Americans can turn when desperately trying to stay alive. I've watched schools, counseling centers, and the mental health industry fail us over and over. And of course they fail. They are predicated on ableist ideas about wellness and productivity and achievement that ensure they fail all students, as I talk about in the previous chapter. They fail Asian Americans in very specific ways because they don't understand the conditions of Asian American suffering. They don't understand the interweaving of model minoritization and immigrant family dynamics to create high stakes, pressurized form of living or really dying. They don't understand how the slow death of not being enough can speed up quite a bit in the ableist environment, college. University makes this worse, not better. I'm not making a call for more cultural competence in the field of mental health. I do not want more diversity training or an Asian American psychology class that ends up essentializing these family dynamics once again into something called Asian cultural values, which does not exist. Cultural competence cannot simply be additive. What Asian American mental health and Asian American suicide teaches us is that we must stop decontextualizing mental health from race and institutionalized ableism. Asian American mental health cannot be done without Asian American studies. Asian American studies cannot be done without Asian American mental health. Because it is only this form of Asian American studies, one that sees the stakes, understands these deathly dynamics, attempts to intervene in them, rejects ableism and model minoritization, that is an ethical project accountable to Asian American life and Asian American death. As my friend and colleague Linda Liu writes, and that's LUU, there are many ways to teach an intro to Asian American studies course, and I do not want all of them. So I say there are many ways to do Asian American studies and many ways to do Asian American mental health, and I do not want all of them. Indeed, there are many ways to study Asian Americans and many ways to provide services to Asian Americans, and I definitely do not want most of them. So in the years that I've been preaching the gospel of Erin, I rediscovered that I have given more talks about her work than she has. But that tells me something. The universities do not know where to look or what questions to ask when thinking about mental health. Counseling centers don't know the term filial debt. Mental health professionals rarely encounter Erin's work. And when students across the country approach me to come speak on their campuses, they don't ask me to do a workshop specifically on why they feel that they are indebted to their parents for the sacrifices. They say something on mental health. And when I suggest something on filial debt as one possibility out of several, and as I briefly describe what that looks like to a workshop, it's like I've yanked open a door they didn't even know existed, and now all they want is to keep it open. Asian American students are dying because no one knows how to give them what they need. The university does not know, but it also doesn't want to. Because model minority success dovetails so nicely with university baselines of meritocratic ableism and hyper-productivity for the best students. The university benefits from the drives that are killing the students. And its university is invested in seeing and promoting Asian American distress as individual pathology to be managed. Many singular problems to be treated singularly. Individual Asian American students stitched back up to go back to business as usual, being good students. What ingratitude Erin's book offers in Erin's ideas and in the life of those ideas I've nurtured in my classrooms is not simply something to help Asian Americans with their mental health. It is teaching a generation of Asian Americans, and there are always new waves, first generation immigrants and second generation Asian American children, to divest from their parents' dreams for them, to divest from university imperatives, to divest from the model minority. I have taught thousands of students to identify the forces in their lives that have made their lives feel unlivable. And I have offered them tools to name and interrogate and disrupt these forces. I have told them that their lives and their pain matter. But even more than all that, I've been asking them to reject the pathway to belonging the US offers them by way of their parents. Universities peddle seductive narratives of success in achieving the American dream, yes. But there is nothing more insidious than recruiting parents in the project of racial subject formation and calling it love. And there is possibly nothing more difficult than rejecting that love. I've been offering Asian American students something other than global competence. I've been giving them permission to opt out of the racialized system that is killing them, helping them see their family lives as part of that system, and then giving them permission to reject their family lives. In rejecting these systems of love, they might begin to dream new ways of creating relationships, new vocabularies of love, and ultimately new forms of personhood outside model minoritization. How might we dream a different Asian America into being, different America into being, by rejecting the narrowed features forced upon us? How might we, in expanding our agency and hope and love, expand agency and hope and love for others? I am raising one of these future Asian Americans. I have not completely figured out how to transform my relationships with my own parents, but I have worked to cultivate my relationship with my daughter in transformative ways. On top of not replicating the parenting I received is the hard, steady labor of creating something new. In the work of parenting, I've had to create a different set of relational rules and a different love language. Tell me if this is actually true or not. Sorry, describe it. I imagine a relationship for the two of us based on mutual commitment and reciprocity and care for each other's needs, with healthy boundaries, no one's needs subsumed by another's, no one's self sacrificed for another. I imagine never asking her to be smaller. I imagine creating space for her to be unwell, for us to be unwell together. I imagine nurturing vulnerability and continually earning each other's trust. I imagine learning together how to navigate all the institutions that fail us. I imagine holding each other accountable and helping each other hold others accountable. I imagine letting her decide when to toe the line and when to burn shit down, when to choose safety and when to choose risk. I imagine being there to catch her when she chooses risk. I imagine pushing each other toward greatest courage and inspiration. I imagine staying with each other at the edge of the abyss, always. I feel hopeful about this. Trying to shift our parents to this kind of system may be impossible. But perhaps it is not our job to change our parents so much as it is to make the conditions of our lives and the next generations livable. At which point we can ask our parents to join us on the other side when we are ready. When they can. So I actually wanted to turn to my passage pickers and start the conversation by asking them a little bit about why they picked those passages and what it meant to them, and then we can maybe ask some questions back and forth and have a conversation. Does that feel okay?
Yeah. Nice. Okay, so I love Mimi's student card. It has been one of the most inspiring things that I've read, and it was probably the first time I remember encountering it when we were on a panel together at NYU when I was still a grad student, and it was one of the first times where I was encouraged to be a bad student and encouraged to embrace my badness, and just discovering that in the context of a university event just felt extremely healing to me, because I'm still recovering from my internalized ableism caused by the model minority myth and everything that I internalized, all the shame from everything Mimi's book talks about, and it kind of like helped me articulate a body of short films that I've been I'm working on that are all about like queer Asian American characters who are all depressed and navigating what it means to drop out of school and to fail their parents' immigrant sacrifices and dreams of them, and what it means and how to find alternative ways of caring for each other and still finding love in spite of the failures. So yeah, it's just like a card that really inspired me, and also the passage at the end of the chapter, how to save your Asian American life in 1 hour. Like it, I feel like it's something that I wish I had exposure to as like a student and even as early as like high school. So I feel that Elia is extremely lucky to have you as a mom. And I just feel like very moved, and I just hope to aspire to the way that you describe the love that you have for each other and the accountability, everything that you wrote at the end of the paragraph. I aspire to embody that in all my relationships. It's like a blueprint for that, and I also hope to let go of the responsibility that we have to heal and change our parents. I love what you wrote at the end about like we can only change our own lives and the generations and be a better ancestor for the generations to come. And it's up to our parents if they want to join us on the journey or not. And I just thought that was such a beautiful way to end this. So, thank you.
So I think the section that I chose from that chapter, so I'll back up and say that Mimi sent me that chapter from the book when I was really ill in 2021.
To read very early access to the book.
I did, and I feel like it saved my life, like you've saved so many of your students' life, and I'm kind of here talking to you. And I want everyone to be witness to how transformative that chapter is. And I hope that you all get to read it and process it and experience it. Because when you talk about filial debt, I'm jumping all over the place because
Jump all over the place.
this
Yeah.
book has so much resonance for so many of our lives and the ways in which we have been raised by our parents with a carrot and a stick. To be like, you have to be perfect. You have filial debt. You know, and it would manifest to me literally being like, Mom, are you my accountant? Literally, you have had a running tab on me. I owe you this much for this much for this much for this much. For the last 15 years, are you my mom or are you my accountant? I've had to say that to her. You know, when I had cancer and they were more interested in me apologizing to my brother and kind of catering to his feelings rather than the fact that I was terrified for my own life. And I understood how much they were bound by their own shame and that it would cost me my life. And I had to be that bad daughter forever. And that no amount of trying to understand and explain to them what they were doing was harmful and violent was ever gonna change. And so it like I had to take 3 years of not talking to my parents to be able to build the boundaries that you're talking about in this book, just to be able to not be that same evil mom to my son. And he's 14, and I'm coming to you after getting a call from his school today, and then being like, oh, you know, he's acting out because he's losing the only home he's ever known, the one he was born and raised into, and I understand how traumatized he is. And so instead of doing what I used to do in the past, which I learned from my dad, which is like, we are going to instill social values in you, that you have to perform like a perfect subject for the society. You as an individual are not as important as a community. Like, instead of policing him and shaming him in all of the ways, the tough love that was practiced upon me, I just sit with him now and I ask him his version of what happened. And then he tells me that he was acting out because he perceives his white science teacher to be racist. And so then I'm like, you know, I really commend you for having a moral compass and for standing up for your Latino co-students who you say that the teacher is racist towards them. And so it is through like doing that work that you're talking about in this book of like undoing of like really understanding that being the bad daughter is the way to survive. You know, that if we actually do give them what they want, like you point out when we go through the exercises in this chapter, if you go through everything that your Asian American parents want from you, it is your very soul, it is your life, it is your thoughts, it is your career, it is your family, it is the way you parent, it is the way you sit, it is what you wear, it is all of it. They want to be in total control of you because they are so afraid. They're so afraid. And like, it is hard to reassure them when I sit there making $30,000 a year in their eyes I'm a failure, and in the eyes of my peers I'm a success. And so you have to learn to just prioritize your authentic self over the self that your parents demand from you. And that is a really hard thing to do because they are your primary source of life. And it feels like such a betrayal to let them down everything. But the only way to kind of live our unwell Asian American life is to like let them down everything, you know, and to like, and the reason I asked you to read the passage on the sloth professoring is because how much I relate to that, how much of my life is spent in bed, how much of my life is spent not doing those things, not performing for them or for capitalism or any of those things, and understanding that I'm worthy of existing just for existing. I don't have to do these things in anything, really. I can just exist.
I remember that the reason why I sent you the draft of the chapter is because you posted on Facebook about how you were feeling about your relationship with your parents and like how you were feeling like a bad daughter, so much guilt and so much shame about it. And I was like, don't feel guilty. I'm feeling much.
Like if you had talked to me 2 years ago, I was at a point where I was like, I can't be on the same planet as that. You know, it just felt so completely at odds what they want me to be and who I am, and their complete refusal to acknowledge all that is good and magnificent in me, you know?
Yeah, and I see all that is good and magnificent in you and in you. And so I love this. I love you both reflecting back to me that like badness has been a concept that has helped you. And the kind of particular details about what it means to be bad, that you're both naming, right? The different kinds of failures that we encapsulate and like leaning into those things. And it's fucking hard.
Yeah.
It was hard. It's scary and it's hard. And so I am so very honored by your networking.
I mean, I wish everybody would kind of read this book because I feel like, you know, it just really kind of brings to front all of the ways in which we are asked to like perform for a really dysfunctional society, and really what we need to be doing is dismantling the society, and it's not going to be dismantled if we keep performing for it. Like we're literally sitting here with our tax dollars going to fucking genocides. Like we should be resisting everything about this country as we live. And like the reason we live here is because we are safer here than in our own fucking country where we would be bombed by the Americans. Right? So it's like, I feel like the privilege, the hardest thing to do is to get my mother to understand that they worked so hard, so I don't have to. So like, why does she want me to labor and to slave and to be this cog in a capitalist machine? Like, didn't she labor so I don't have to? Like, so if I'm not, like, why doesn't she actually celebrate that I get to rest when she didn't?
I just have a question that I prepared, but I love everything that you've been saying, and I think we definitely all should be spend no more times indebted to performing for this dysfunctional system, and we should devote every ounce of our effort into tearing it down and building a better one. So if anyone leaves today, I feel like we should leave today with
That, yeah.
and also read Mimi's book, but that brings me to the question that comes from the student card that Talia read at the beginning, and you say how the student urges us to refuse, and how the Asian American movement was birthed from the fires of student protest, and it makes me just think of like our unwellness almost as like the moment we realize our unwellness as like a springboard for being able to say no, or just like naming a boundary for the first time. And I wonder, like, as what kind of advice you would give to like a young student who's first realizing that how the society has made them unwell, like how can they listen to the refusal?
Thank you, that's a great question. In my classroom and in the workshop that I do when I work with students, I've come to realize that some of the key work is simply making it safe for people to admit that they're unwell. Like, that is the very first step, because we're all pretending all the time that we're okay, right? Because it's scary to not be okay because you get punished, and because it's a personal failure if you don't have your shit together. And so I call this compulsory wellness. It's an imperative to perform wellness all the time. And it shows up in all different kinds of ways. And so like students are always pretending they have shit together, and then they think they're the only ones that don't have their shit together, but everyone else seems to have their shit together, right? We all think that at some point, right? No, nobody has their shit together, but we're all pretending. And so the first step is to, like, they can't refuse it until becomes safe to refuse it, right? So I try to create spaces where I'm vulnerable about being unwell. That's why I share that vulnerable list about the ways that I'm a bad, professor. Some of those things I don't care about. I think it's funny, that people think it's bad. But some of those things actually are really hard for me to write down. Like, to really admit that, like, I really don't do that thing that I know I'm supposed to do. Right? I don't have the capacity to do the thing that people are expecting me to do. And I try to model that in my classrooms, in my spaces, so that once we all, I love the language of springboards. Once we all are able to admit all the ways that we're unwell, then we can let go of our investment in wellness and performing, right? And then yes, then that opens up a whole different, opens up so many ways of being outside of that perfect whatever that you're supposed to be. And then that's for me where the refusal starts to happen. It opens up to different kinds of identities, personhoods, majors. Some of my students change their major, and I'm like, sorry, so they're like it makes my students have realized how much has become foreclosed. So that they didn't realize was foreclosed because they were just doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? And then once you see that actually, if you admit that all that shit you're doing feels awful, once you can admit that it feels awful, then suddenly, oh, maybe we like take a detour, and suddenly there are other options. But it is scary. It is scary. My students often ask me, like, well, what do I do about this debt? How do I get rid of it? Right? And so spoiler, it doesn't go in part, and I lay out in the book, that the more successful you are at doing what they want, it actually increases their debt. Because it proves that what they did was worth it to them. So the debt doesn't go down. That is what blew my fucking mind when I first read Aaron's work. The debt increases. So you cannot actually pay it back. Then my students are horrified. And they're like, what the fuck do we do then? How do we opt out of this then? And it just keeps growing. And this is where the badness comes in. And I love you, Pyaari, saying that like, you have to kind of be bad forever. Because if you're only bad a little bit, you're just bad, then you get kind of pulled back in, right? Being good sometimes.
You just have to keep them boundaries.
You have to be bad all the time. And that is scary. That is really scary to a lot of people when offered as a solution. Most people, and some of you probably this resonates with you, most pick and choose, right? Like what they like will do, how they'll comply and how they won't. And there's like different pressure points, right? So like for me, for instance, I didn't become a medical doctor, but at least I got a PhD, right? Like that was like, you know, I'm queer, but then I'm married to someone who presents as a man. So like, oh, okay, maybe she's not really queer. We can forget that part, right? She looks straight. Like we make different kinds of choices, right? To then like pass in some ways. I know lots of students who say like, as long as I get straight A's, my parents don't care about anything else I do, right? That's like the cover. That's the balance. But that is a balancing act that's still within the debt. That may like make it feel a little bit more livable, but you don't get rid of the debt. That actually has to be embracing that thing. That's hard, scary work. And so my students are like, well, I don't want to lose my parents. So like that becomes a lot of the conversation. Like how do you maintain these relationships even as you want to set boundaries and you want to embrace being a different kind of person. And for me, like I commend that you did not speak to your parents for 3 years. 3 years. That's fucking awesome. And I, you know, have gone in and out speaking with my parents. Like, you never fully get away. No, you get away. But I created space for myself at certain moments. You know, like where my mom did something fucked up, I didn't talk to her for 6 months. You know, like that's. And I have to keep really, really hard boundaries. I hang up the phone on my dad, which is like really, really bad, right? As a Viet child, you don't do that. And I started doing that as a teenager and I just kept doing it. So when he like started making me mad, I'm like, oh, hang up on him. And then he realized, oh, I can't do that. I want to talk to her. Right. And the ball's in his court. You want to talk to me, it's going to be on my terms, not just your terms. And sometimes it means that we don't talk about for long stretches or about certain topics. But it is continual hard work that I feel is worth it. But yeah, it's scary and it's extremely painful at times.
It's like that filial debt is basically a code word for complete emotional codependency. It's a code word for you just really get to do what we want you to do. And if you don't, you're a bad kid. And it feels very much like what they're looking for is like complete obedience and a servant, you know, rather than a child. And it's a very kind of alienating and damaging kind of relationship if you don't put those boundaries in place. Like my brother has never put boundaries in place. He is that child who's in continuous filial debt to them. And so there are no boundaries. When they want, they will pick up the phone and call if it's 20 times a day. Giving no thought to the fact that he is a professional. He works at a job, he is a husband, he is a father, you know, he goes swimming. Like, no, he has to be present and available at all given times, no matter the fact that they're 2,000 miles away. He has to drop everything and fly to them. Like that is the expectation. And like if you are going to give them all of that, then you have no life left. You have no help left. You have no romantic relationship left with your partner. You don't actually get to self-actualize. You don't get to know what your own happiness is. And none of those things are the ways I want to live. And to put the boundaries in place and not do those things, I get to be the bad child. the fact that I show up every day and still fall every day is irrelevant because I'm a bad child because I have bad grades.
So might as well just not call, right? You're already a bad child in those other ways. Yeah.
So, you know, I feel like there's a book that came out recently by Prachi Gupta. It's called They Called Us Exceptional and Other Lies That Raised Us. And she's unpacking a lot of what you're unpacking in a very particular South Asian familial context. And the ways in which, like, within the South Asian context, like caste and class and all of those things, caste really begins to complicate things and how that for South, like for at least for Indians, specifically. Because we are raised, even if we are not, if Indians are Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, whatever, Sikh, they may be in a culture where Hinduism is the hegemony. And what Hinduism teaches and practices every day is that there are no equals. There are no equals. There are only people who are superior to you and people who are inferior to you, and all of society is hierarchical. And so, like, parents will never actually treat you as an equal. You could be 50, 70 years old, but you'll never be an equal because they will.
The idea that you are equal to your parents is like preposterous.
Correct.
Like, what?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how old you are, you're.
Yeah, you
you're a
never,
child.
you never actually get to be the author of your own life. They will always be the authors of your life according to that. You know? And so that's a totally kind of unsustainable way to live, you know.
And I think like some of the ways that we're talking about badness or being bad, like being a bad subject, being a bad citizen. I think those of us who do like progressive social justice work can recognize ways that you might want to be a bad citizen, the ways you disrupt certain kinds of, you know, structural forces. I think it's a lot harder to see it in our families, right? To take it back to that kind of intimate space where a lot of our shame is we're attached to, and it's because these relationships are important to us, right? So like, right, the stakes feel actually a lot higher in our families. And so like what I love about what you're saying and what you're doing your work, Jess, is like making that connection right, between the different ways of being bad and how they're actually all related to each other and not simply like outside world versus like, right? Like we're failing in all kinds of ways as personhoods. That's what that how what looks what are we going to do in all different ways. And students feel usually, I think, like really, they feel something opens up for them. And my hope is that once they leave my classroom with my workshops, leave my talks, you know, they're able to kind of carry that, think about what that badness is in every space that they move in. Try to make space for others to be bad as well. In those spaces.
Yeah, I think once this year I met someone who introduced herself to me as a good girl, and I just laughed and laughed and laughed. And I was like, I'm here to, you know, what was the word I said? Like to loot you or something like that. To rock you. Because, you know, I'm a really bad girl. And I'm not here to be a good girl for patriarchy. You know, I'm not a handmaid of patriarchy. I'm not a good girl.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah. Let's have a larger conversation. Any questions, comments, feelings? I heard you sigh already.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about your journey to the confidence to the sloth?
Yeah. Like how did I become lazy? So
Into it, so
Yeah.
it's so good, it's a great place to be.
I will say that I was not always lazy. I was a good student, and I was a little bit lazier than others, I think in college. I managed to be a good student without actually having to like work very hard. And then I went to grad school. Grad school was where like souls would die. So grad school was where it really got ingrained in me that my value is my achievement and my productivity. And everything is about how well I do scholarship, how rigorous, I hate the fucking word rigor, and how rigorous I am in all my work. And so much of it about getting validation from professors, right, about this. So like I was trained into it. And it took years of then untraining myself towards the end of grad school and out of grad school. And part of it was actually watching. I was in grad school, I was like about, I think, start writing my dissertation. And a few of my mentors didn't get tenure, meaning they got fired from the universities, right? And I was like, oh my God, you can do everything right and they can still throw you away. So why the fuck are we doing everything right? And so that was a huge moment for me where I was like, okay, then why can't I do things on my terms then? Right? If I do it on their terms and I still don't make it, like, how do I do academic work? How do I do, writing, arts work on my terms instead of what the institution is asking of me? That began my process of kind of leaning into the things that people think are failure to try to do different kinds of work. In terms of laziness in particular as a concept, I think that actually took me to the point where, so I became a mother 12 years ago, and I had pretty severe postpartum depression in the first year. My first year was miserable. I fucking hated it. Hated motherhood. I was like, this was a total a scam, right? Like Ponzi scheme, because I was promised happiness and meaningfulness and joy, and every day is drudgery and awfulness and never sleeping, right? She cried like all day long, every day for like 3 months. And I felt like I was a failure. I was a bad mom for not loving this, for not doing it right, for all the things. And I sort of hit kind of a rock bottom. And I was like, oh, actually, like, one, I don't like the narrative that I'm a bad mom. Let's not go with that. Let's find a different narrative for this. But also, like, I'm not going to survive this if I don't find a different way to navigate this. I need radical rest. I need to fucking sleep, right? I realized that my mental health was so much tied to sleep. So I even like now get, 7-8 hours of sleep every night. But I refuse to get any less than that. I sometimes sleep 9-10 hours if I can. And that moment where I was like, I will die if I don't. Like I had to get to that point. I will die if I don't rest. Literally. Oh, maybe we should all just be fucking resting, right? Instead of getting to the point of almost dying. And so that was a huge. So like to my work was, kind of moving away from academia, and then my personal life having to almost die, right? To then be like, no, I'm going to reclaim rest. I'm going to reclaim joy for myself. I want my life to feel different. It's going to require being really, really busy, right? And being okay with that. But yeah, it had to get really, really bad for me before I could feel good with that. And then I have to like talk about it all the time too. So that helps where I claim laziness, talk about it, ask other people to be lazy with me. Thank you for that.
First, thank you all so much for this really well. I'm a PhD student who actually also teaches. I know, it's really bad. But I also preach the gospel of Aaron in my research and my teaching. I'm teaching a class right now at UC Berkeley, which is ironically both like a birthplace of ethnic studies and also model minority central. And the class is about rethinking the model minority. And so I'm curious for you because I feel like in the book and in what you shared, you're mostly, it seems like a lot of students have responded with a lot of openness to what you're offering them, especially around these really deeply rooted feelings of indebtedness. And I'm wondering if you've also encountered a lot of resistance ever from students Since I'm teaching my students material like yours and Erin's, and it's really interesting to watch them grapple with this from week to week. And also in a setting where they are going to be graded in some way on how they're responding to so they're reading, and so I'm wondering, I guess, for you, if alongside that sort of receptiveness and the thirst for that, there's also been kind of sort of resistance to it, especially since it's such a deeply rooted.
It's a great question. Again, I'm sorry you're in grad school. I want to say that students, the only thing that they've really been resistant to is like whether or not they cut their parents off, right? Like that kind of like at the end, what do I do with this? But the ideas themselves, they have not been. And I think part of why the ideas have not been threatening to them in a way where they shut down is because we start from a place of like, we're all unwell, we're all dealing with shit. And so I create the space in my classroom for people to be vulnerable about how hard things are. And then everyone is always sharing about how hard life is, right? And so that truth sits in the room all the time. And so then how do we name the things that hurt? How do we figure out the structures that shape the way that our pain appears? That then becomes very, very desirable as a method for thinking about the pain that's kind of sitting in the room of college, right? And so many of my students who take, I'm remembering back to when I taught Asian American Studies, I taught that at the University of Maryland for many years, fuck the University of Maryland. I don't work there anymore, and if you work before, you'll find out why. I was fired from there, but I taught Asian American Studies to mostly Asian American students. And now I teach disability studies to some Asian students, but a whole mix of students. But when I taught Asian American Studies, a lot of my students came into class with no Asian American background, right? From the other side of campus, you know, where the sciences are, right? They take it from like a gen ed environment, and they're like, oh, it happens to be about Asians, so I'll take the class, right? And but what kept them there, what made them buy in, is realizing that this class is about their lives, right? And what I fault a lot of Asian American Studies classes for is not doing that, not making it so the students see themselves actually in the material. That's the most useless fucking Asian American Studies class ever. If Asian American students take it and don't see themselves in the class, like what the fuck are you teaching, right? And so that's really a major goal of mine, is that students need to see themselves in the material, in the way we talk about the material. This has to be useful for their lives outside of the class. And when it's framed that way, then they're like, okay, we're on board, and we're going to try to take what we can to make sense of our lives. And so, I hope I answered your question. There. Yes.
Thank you so much for all your insights. Thank you so much, but I was really but I'm wondering if you have any insights on this, like, not only are we discussing kind of mental health in the communal dynamic, so much of it is more nuanced and about gender. So if we think about the way that kind of hold the greatest net, it's also gender to be like
The daughter.
versus the son. And I think, you know, speaking from experience, there gets to a point when you hold so much debt that resentment builds and you start becoming attached. Versus the child has always been that, it becomes easier to be good and to provide for goodness, and especially if you're a sibling. So I'm wondering if you have any insight looking at like the gender dynamics within the Asian household. And it's like, how do you hold your own boundaries in owning the badness when there's so much extra gender shame?
Yeah. The gendered nature of it, I think, is really key. And we haven't really talked a lot about that today, but Erin's work definitely looks specifically at daughters. That is what she looks at in terms of the family and the burden on Asian American daughters. And when I talk with my students, they all share similar stories, right? Like their brothers got away with shit that they, you know, they could never get away with, right? And so much of it, so the activity that Pyaari is mentioning, that I do in my classes, I actually replicate it in books. You can like follow along to a workbook and fill stuff out. But the question I ask is first, Who here feels that they owe their parents for their sacrifice that they first? Then I ask, what is it that you owe? How do you pay it back? That's when you start listing out all the things you're supposed to do, right? When you list out all the things you're supposed to do, the gendered nature of it becomes very clear. Because for some people, it's about what they wear, their bodies, right? Are like, girls' bodies are policed in all kinds of ways, their sexuality is policed in all kinds of ways. Those become expectations that don't exist on other kinds of bodies, right, in the family. And my students, it's really interesting, like they know this, but they don't know it until it's like written on a giant whiteboard where we list everything out that people owe. Oh my God, my whole fucking life and everything about every aspect of myself in all kinds of gender ways. And they usually, the women in my classes and the femmes and those who are gendered female, like tend to get really, really pissed off when they see so clearly on the board, right, how differential that the debt is. I think sometimes it's their anger that helps them deal with it, right? Realizing how deeply unfair and how much more of the burden that they've had to carry, or also the kind of burden they've had to carry differently that silence them in different ways. Yeah. Sometimes anger is the fuel to kind of like hold some of that shame at bay, the shame that's really big. Do you want to add to that? Okay.
I've seen a lot of my friends who are oldest daughters.
Oldest daughters, worst.
They like have had to parent their kids, their siblings and their parents. And so many of them end up not having kids or not getting married and no longer wanting to nurture their own children because they're so fucking burnt out on being responsible for everybody else's emotions. And like the one thing that talking about gender differences, the way that daughters are made responsible for the emotions of every person in the family. Like you have to be responsible for your dad, your mom, your brother, everybody. And in the meanwhile, what you want is irrelevant and invisible. And so I would really recommend reading Sara Emmett and her Living a Feminist Life, because she talks about the experience of being a feminist and living in a society and trying to go against the grain of society and how much energy that takes. And she compares it to like a salmon trying to swim upstream against the current, and how much more energy it takes for a fish to swim against the current than for the fish to just flow and flow with patriarchy and capitalism, And I was wondering if your students, if would they feel resistance to this content because they're so invested in being that very definition of model minority and succeeding in America, because all of us are so primed for that success compared to so many other communities. Like we are literally pitted against like Black and Latino communities so that we succeed. And we are often succeeding on the backs of these communities. And it is, something that our parents don't ever want to acknowledge because they're so invested in their sacrifices being validated by the American dream that they don't want to acknowledge that they actually have privilege compared to Black and Latino families. And that, when we critique America, like they take that critique as like being a critique of them, as if they embody all of America and these sacrifices they have made. It's a betrayal for you to like critique America because we gave you all of this. And like, it becomes so complicated, right? Because I have to tell my dad, like, Dad, you are not like white supremacist patriarchal capitalism. Like, you don't have to embody these systems and defend them. It is okay to find problems with them and to talk about the problems with them. Like, you succeeded because this country has set you up to succeed on the backs of Black and brown people. Like, it is really complicated. And, you know, I think that I have been constantly surrounded by South Asian overachievers who are trained by their parents to be like, you know, the best artist, the best scientist, the best doctor. They're gonna be the best. They're so fucking competitive. And it is intense to be in community with them because they're so invested in
In the best.
in those notions of success. And they will discard you like that if you don't fit in.
That is something that I will admit that I really struggle with. Like,
Yeah.
like being valued for being exceptional, right? And like, so I was a straight student, I was a lot, right? And so like, I have always struggled with like, I don't want to do things I'm not good at,
Yeah.
right? And I only really am able to receive praise if it's like the best at the thing that I'm getting the praise about, right? Otherwise, it's like, it's like best or failure. Those are the two options. And that's, I deeply ingrained in me still, and so. Yeah.
Still I'm doing it.
I still am doing it. The book is the best. It has to be the best book ever. It can't be good. It can't be the best. Yes. Oh, actually, wait, do you have it in here?
I did,
Yes.
I feel my question was about what the unlearning process looked like for you. I think you kind of, I think both of you kind of answered that in the sense that it sounds extremely violent and uncomfortable, like psychically, which is both encouraging and discouraging at the same time. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I was just kind of curious on a personal level, like if there were, if I'm sure the unlearning goes on for your entire life and that there are times when it's harder and times when it's easier. I think I'm wondering, other than your experience hitting rock bottom with like your postpartum, learning the things that you can with that, like maybe another instance in which, I don't know, like you were able to, in which that looks different. Yeah, selfishly, it's also something I'm trying to look really personally.
I will say that like, I get along with my dad great now. And
Wow.
it's really, but it's been hard, so it's been hard, and definitely we have like, we have some idiosyncrasies that I think you can't replicate, right? Like, so that there's something very particular to my dad, it's really weird, and so not typical in some ways, he's always been a little bit afraid of me.
Yeah.
So that has helped me to set boundaries, right? My parents are divorced when I was younger, and so I lived with my mom. So there was already a boundary there with my dad, in a way where actually, if he wanted a relationship, he actually had to do work. It wasn't a given, right? And so I was able to actually push him out when he wasn't doing the thing that I wanted to do. For instance, you know, he would give me money to pay for college, right? And he thought that that meant he could have a say about things. And I was like, no, take your fucking money then if you're gonna try to tell me what to do. So like I was able to do that because of certain kind of structures around me already, right? Kind of structural, the conditions of our relationship were already like helpful for that. But then, you know, he also learned over the years. And so we've done a lot of back and forth of like, why can't you be normal? And then I'm like, you know, like a lot of that. Why can't you be normal is a question my whole childhood. Like, can you be normal? Why do you have to do things differently? And he stopped asking that at some point, right? And some of it I think is age, where like once I hit my 30s, he was like, oh, okay, you're like not gonna die. You know, like you've survived, right? Oh, like the things I thought you were not gonna survive, you survived them. You're sort of an adult now. I can back off on some things, right? So that I think with my dad. Also, he wanted a relationship with his grandkid, right? Like, and you were saying different times in your life, things up and down. So like different milestones will trigger different things. Like me becoming a parent shifted my relationship with my parents because now suddenly we have like another variable and another kind of set of relationships that get nurtured or not nurtured, right? Or weaponized even, right? Like telling me I'm a bad mother for not doing this. But yeah, my mom told me I was a bad mother. I thought I told you this. Like the well, when you were a baby, so like when I was dealing with postpartum depression, some of it was like my mom telling me that like I was doing things wrong. Right, so like that, I had not given her the ability to do that for a few years already. And then suddenly now we had a new situation where she could do that again, right, in a new way, if something else happened. I don't know, hopeful story, I didn't end on a hopeful way, okay, let me go back to my dad, so with my dad. We've gotten to a place where I've given up any kind of like real intimacy with him. If we don't have a relationship, we talk about stuff, we don't talk about stuff. But during the pandemic, every month, he came by and dropped off some Viet food. And I learned to bake in the pandemic, and I baked him some bread. And that became like the kind of lovely exchange that asked nothing else of us. Right, and that worked and has worked. We're doing more. That has worked because he stopped asking more of me. And we kind of tacitly never talked about it, kind of agreed that these are the terms of our relationship. We can show each other love in these ways, but we can't do more than that, because more than that triggers all kinds of anxieties and, you know, unhealthy dynamics. And he accepted that. It does require him to do that though, right? There are parents who will never accept that, and there are parents who are willing to accept it because they want at least something. He also has his own life, which I feel like is really helpful. Like he is, you know, a socialite, he has his own life, he goes partying with his wife. They have, you know, friends they go on cruises with and stuff, so like he's not that codependent, right? My life is not a reflection on his life in the way that it was when I was younger, right? The kind of like their sense of success is in your success and everything you do, and he has been able to kind of break that, where he has his own life, his own type of success, I have my own life, and he's accepted that. Actually, my mom has too. She has her own life too, and she does all kinds of, you know, things on her own. I think that them getting their own lives, I think, was a big part of it. Yes.
I really appreciate your saying things of being a bad daughter, whatever, because I was a bad daughter since childhood, because I realized that was like how I had to survive, was like cleaning out my parents. But my question is really about being in grad school also, because I am also a grad student at UC Berkeley, but in the law school. So I love to connect. Law school is one of the most unpopular places. And I really know like what you mean by like auto minority central, because a lot of my classmates, and I think you've addressed like how to talk to your parents about, you know, living life on terms that are not bound by like auto minority ideals. And we talked about like talking to students about it, but I think something I struggle with a lot is when I talk to my peers, because I think a lot of them are they feel very bound and constrained, and that they have to do certain things in law school. And it's definitely pushed by the school. I think they're considered prestigious and also very capitalistically profitable for the school, like going to big law firms, doing law review, things like that. And so how do you like navigate or have these conversations with your peers about like maybe not listening to those narratives and trying something new?
Wanted to really teach us that. Some of the work that you do in trying to nurture that capacity for Jones body. Think about it. I think the kind of resistance that you're sort of naming, it very clearly to come out of fear and anxiety, to me at least, right? Like, because you have to believe that you're doing everything right, you're gonna get the thing they're supposed to get. And having that pulled out from under you, right, is really, really terrifying. So like, just keep believing it. And so the only way I think that people have been willing to really look at it is one, rock bottom, right? But also, like I said earlier, like giving everyone permission to say how hard things are, that you're not a failure because things feel hard. And once people are able to start admitting that and realizing that we're all kind of failing together, and that's fine, that opens up the possibility to then consider other things. But if they're still invested in that compulsory wellness because they're so afraid of what it says about them, if they aren't okay, yeah, they're not going to be able to look at it directly. Does that make sense?
Are you able to connect with like movement lawyers and social justice kind of based
Oh yeah.
practices
Kind of
within your law
friends,
school? Because that might be a place where people who are committed to the alternative will gravitate.
Yeah, there are spaces like that in the school. I think like something I personally struggle with is that I often find that the people who are most willing to reject like big law firms, the clerkships, etc., are often also people who are like of a higher economic class.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people who I personally interact with more are people from more marginalized communities, and they feel like they have to do this big law, to make money for their families. There's this like inherent tension that I often find between like people who maybe are willing to go down the same career path that I want to do, and people who have the same lived experiences that I feel like I have, and that's also something I struggle with a lot.
So that makes me think about like, okay, so I call this like differential vulnerability, right? Like more people are more in danger than other people, right? In these ways. And so like, on the one hand, I'm like, fuck you fuckers who it's so easy for you to do things, right? To reject things because you have certain kinds of privileges. But also I want to flip that around and think about what has enabled them for it to feel easier. How can we build that for yourself, right? How can we make it easier? How can we make it less dangerous to reject the things that we're told we're supposed to be and do? And the only way we do that is together. We can't, individually, we're always in danger, right? The only way to create safety is collectively. And so how do you make spaces where people feel like they can make those choices?
Sorry, I got really hungry at AAD, so I need the question to be repeated.
It's about like how to talk with peer leaders who are kind of invested in doing all the right things and not wanting to like think about alternatives or having trouble thinking. Is that a good kind of summary? Yeah. How do we encourage that?
Yeah, I think just like having books like this and having movies out there and novels or just like in like popular culture, just like subverting the model minority, the Asian American representation as the model minority and making like, because I think the badness and the refusal, it exists every day, all the time in big and small ways. And sometimes like maybe someone in a position where they have to like pursue like a more financially viable career because the parents depend on them to make money, like maybe they can't completely change their career in the beginning, but maybe there's other small ways that they could refuse and embrace the badness, and maybe eventually they could get into a place where they could change their career after they have the tools to do law for like or they have the tools in the community to do like law for more social movements, or to be like an artist, to not necessarily make work in a mainstream way. Like I think there's a lot of pressure for everything to have to happen right now and all at once, but I think like even though like I don't like parts of my past where I've had to like work for make art for some large neoliberal institutions, like I think the experience of having to sell my soul and then reflecting on that helped me realize how precious and important it is, the work that I'm making now on my own terms, and then I had to go down that path in order to make the work that I do now, as sad as that sounds. So.
It doesn't sound sad though. I feel like that's, thank you for that. I love the using big and small. I love that, thinking about that. And what you're describing for me is like, that's what our unwellness looks like, right? It's having to navigate all these institutions, making choices because things are awful all the time in all different kinds of ways. And so like, I guess it doesn't sound sad to me because it sounds like, oh, that's you moving through your unwellness, right? To find a way to make art that helps other people, which is amazing. Are we out of time? we're out of time. I got this. I'm so sorry, but we're hanging out, so we're gonna come up and talk some more. There's books to be bought. And those of you who didn't get to see, there's my tarot cards at back and some letter writing activities, so feel free to go back and spend some time with your own unwellness in the activities. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.